5 of the most celebrated women in London stood in a perfect silk-lined row at the edge of the Ashworth Ballroom, each one groomed since girlhood for exactly this moment, and every single one of them was about to be ignored. The Duke of Ashworth did not dance. This was a fact so well established in London society that it had graduated from gossip to gospel. In 6 consecutive seasons, Edmund Hale had attended every ball required of his station, stood against the farthest wall with the rigid posture of a man enduring a surgical procedure, and left before the final waltz without once setting foot on the polished floor. He did not smile at debutantes. He did not compliment gowns. He did not linger near the refreshment tables where mothers circled like ravens over a fresh kill. He arrived, he observed, he departed. And every season, the line of hopeful women grew longer, because there is nothing more intoxicating to London society than a man who refuses to be caught. Tonight was supposed to be different. Lady Ashworth, his mother, the Dowager Duchess, had made this abundantly clear in a letter so sharp it could have drawn blood. She had written 3 pages in her immaculate copperplate hand, detailing the 5 women she had personally selected, their bloodlines, their fortunes, their temperaments, and the precise social catastrophe that would unfold if Edmund did not choose a bride before the season ended. He was 31. He was the last of the Hale line. The estate required an heir, and the dowager's patience, never generous to begin with, had been entirely consumed. Edmund folded the letter and placed it in the fireplace without reading the final page. The Ashworth Ballroom was magnificent in the way only old money could produce, not showy, not gilded to the point of vulgarity, but deep, layered, rich with the weight of generations. 3 crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling painted with faded celestial maps, their light casting the room in a warm amber glow that softened every face and made even the most ordinary gown shimmer. The floors were pale marble, veined with grey, polished to such a high gloss that the dancers seemed to move across still water. Tall arched windows stood open to the June night, and the faint scent of jasmine drifted in from the terrace gardens, mixing with beeswax, champagne, and the heady, competing perfumes of 300 guests. Edmund stood in his usual position near the east colonnade, partially obscured by a marble pillar, a glass of untouched brandy warming in his hand. His evening coat was impeccably cut, black as ink, unadorned by any of the ridiculous embroidered waistcoats the younger lords wore like plumage. His dark hair was slightly too long, brushing the stiff white collar at his nape, and his jaw was set in the particular expression his valet had once described, unwisely and within earshot, as funeral. He watched the room with the detached precision of a man cataloguing threats rather than pleasures. His gaze swept the crowd, paused briefly on the 5 women his mother had arranged along the south wall like porcelain figurines in a shop window, and moved on. Lady Isabel Whitmore was first. Blonde, tall, elegant in pale blue silk, her laugh calibrated to carry exactly the right distance. She was the daughter of a marquess, accomplished in French, watercolors, and the art of making every man in a room feel singularly important. She glanced toward Edmund with the precise frequency designed to appear accidental. He did not return the glance. Beside her stood Miss Sophia Crane, dark-haired and sharp-eyed, the heiress to a shipping fortune so vast it made even the oldest titles salivate. She did not pretend disinterest. She stared at Edmund openly, her chin lifted, daring him to approach. He noted her confidence. He respected it. He did not move. The third was Lady Catherine Howe, who possessed the kind of delicate, trembling beauty that inspired sonnets, and, in Edmund's private estimation, suggested a woman who would weep at thunderstorms and require constant reassurance. The fourth was Miss Anne Lyle, quiet, sensible, politically connected, the sort of match his solicitors would approve of on paper, and his heart would never register at all. The fifth was Lady Margot Sinclair, a widow of 28, with knowing eyes and a reputation for being devastatingly witty. She was the dowager's favorite, and she knew it. She held her champagne glass like a scepter. Edmund looked at all five of them and felt absolutely nothing. It was not cruelty. He did not enjoy their discomfort or feed on the power of refusal. It was something far worse. It was absence. Somewhere in the years since his father's death, since the crushing machinery of the dukedom had been lowered onto his shoulders like a millstone, Edmund had lost the ability to feel curiosity about another human being. He managed the estate. He sat in Parliament. He answered correspondence. He fulfilled every duty with meticulous, grinding competence. But the part of him that might once have looked across a crowded room and felt a pull, a spark, an irrational desire to know a stranger's name, that part had gone dark. He was not heartbroken. He was simply empty. His mother appeared at his elbow like a silk-clad ghost. "You are doing it again," the dowager said. Her voice was low, pleasant, and carried the faint, unmistakable threat of a woman who had spent 40 years bending aristocrats to her will. "Breathing," Edmund replied. "I was rather hoping to continue. Standing against a wall like a gargoyle, while 5 perfectly acceptable women wait for you to behave like a gentleman. I have spoken to Lord Pemberton about the drainage bill. I have complimented Lady Ashford's new curtains. I have consumed exactly 1 glass of brandy. By any reasonable measure, I am behaving impeccably. You have not danced." "I do not dance." The dowager placed her gloved hand on his forearm. To anyone watching, it was a tender, maternal gesture. Edmund felt the iron grip beneath the silk. "You will dance tonight, Edmund. You will select one of those women. You will lead her to the floor, and you will smile as though the experience does not physically pain you. And if I do not? Then I will invite all 5 of them to Ashworth Park for the summer, and you will endure their company at breakfast, luncheon, and dinner for 8 consecutive weeks." Edmund looked at his mother. She was not bluffing. She had never bluffed in her life. Bluffing implied a willingness to fold, and the Dowager Duchess of Ashworth did not fold. She simply waited until reality rearranged itself around her expectations. "1 dance," he said. "1 is all it takes," the Dowager replied, and disappeared into the crowd with the satisfied glide of a woman who had just won a war. Edmund set his untouched brandy on the nearest tray. He straightened the cuffs of his coat. He took a single breath and turned toward the south wall, where 5 women waited, with carefully arranged expressions of disinterest that fooled absolutely no one. He took 1 step, then another. The crowd seemed to sense the shift. Conversations dimmed, fans paused mid-flutter, heads turned with the slow, synchronized precision of sunflowers following light. The Duke of Ashworth was moving. The Duke of Ashworth was walking toward the dance floor. The information rippled outward in concentric waves of whispered excitement. Lady Isabel adjusted her gloves. Miss Crane lifted her chin a fraction higher. Lady Catherine's cheeks flushed a delicate rose. Miss Lyle clasped her hands together. Lady Margot smiled, slow and knowing, already composing her acceptance. Edmund walked past Lady Isabel without a glance. He walked past Miss Crane. He walked past Lady Catherine, Miss Lyle, and Lady Margot, who was mid-sip of her champagne and nearly choked. He walked past all 5 of them. He continued across the ballroom floor, past the edge of the dancers, past the orchestra, past the towering floral arrangements that his mother had spent a small fortune importing from Holland, and stopped at a narrow oak door set into the far wall, a door so unremarkable that most guests assumed it led to a servants' corridor. It led to the library. He opened it. The sound of the ballroom, the music, the laughter, the clinking crystal, fell away like a curtain dropping. The Ashworth Library was vast, silent and cold. 3 stories of shelved walls rose into darkness, the upper galleries accessible by a spiraling iron staircase that disappeared into shadow. The only light came from a single oil lamp burning on a reading table near the east windows, casting a small, warm circle of gold across a surface covered in open books. Sitting at the table, entirely alone, her back to the ballroom door, was a woman Edmund had never seen before. She was not dressed for a ball. That was the first thing he noticed. She wore a plain dress of dark charcoal wool, high-collared, long-sleeved, without a single piece of ornamentation. Her dark hair was pinned back in a simple twist, the kind of arrangement that took 30 seconds and no mirror. She wore no jewels, no gloves. Her hands, bare and ink-stained at the fingertips, were turning the pages of a heavy leather-bound volume with the careful, practiced touch of someone who understood that books were more fragile than they appeared. She did not look up when the door opened. Edmund stood in the doorway, 1 foot in the roaring brightness of the ballroom, 1 foot in the quiet dark of the library, and for the first time in years, he felt something shift inside his chest. It was not attraction, not yet. It was something older, more primal. It was recognition, the particular, unsettling sensation of encountering a person who existed in the same frequency of silence that he did. "The ball is through that door," he said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. She did not startle. She turned a page, finished the line she was reading, and only then lifted her head. Her face was angular, unconventionally beautiful, with high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and grey eyes so pale they looked almost silver in the lamplight. There was no alarm in her expression, no embarrassment at being discovered. She looked at him with the calm, assessing gaze of a woman who had been interrupted and was deciding whether the interruption warranted her attention. "I am aware," she said. Her voice was low, unhurried. "I can hear it. You are not dancing. Neither are you." The observation landed with quiet precision. Edmund felt the corner of his mouth twitch, a ghost of amusement he did not quite allow to become a smile. "You have me at a disadvantage," he said, stepping fully into the library and letting the door close behind him. The ballroom vanished. "I do not know your name." "Eleanor Voss." She closed the book carefully, marking her page with a slim leather ribbon. "I catalogue your library." He stared at her. "I beg your pardon?" "Your steward, Mr. Harding, engaged my services 6 weeks ago. The Ashworth collection has not been properly catalogued since 1796. Several of the volumes in the East Gallery are incorrectly shelved, and your first edition Chaucer is being stored next to a window that receives direct afternoon sunlight, which is slowly destroying it." She delivered this information the way a surgeon might deliver a diagnosis, calmly, precisely, without apology, and with the clear implication that the patient was in serious condition. "You are a librarian," Edmund said. "I am a cataloguer and conservator. Librarian is a title typically reserved for those employed by institutions. I work independently. And my steward hired you. Your steward begged me. The East Gallery alone contains over 4,000 volumes, 200 of which are pre-17th century and require immediate environmental remediation. I told him I would need a minimum of 4 months. Edmund looked at her. He looked at the open books on the table, at the careful notes written in a small, precise hand on sheets of paper arranged in neat columns, at the magnifying glass resting beside an inkwell, at the soft cloth she had been using to clean the binding of the volume before her. She had been working. While 300 people drank his champagne and danced on his floors and schemed to become his duchess, this woman had been sitting alone in his library, in the dark, saving his books. "How did you come to be here tonight?" he asked. "I am here every night. I work better when the house is quiet, but Mr. Harding informed me that the library would be accessible during the ball, as the guests were not expected to wander this far from the refreshments." He was correct. Until now. "You did not wish to attend the ball." Eleanor looked at him, as though he had asked whether she wished to set herself on fire. "No. May I ask why?" "Because I am not a guest. I am an employee, and because I find ballrooms to be the least efficient rooms in any great house. An enormous amount of space, light, and expense devoted entirely to the act of walking in circles." Edmund sat down. He did not ask permission. He pulled out the chair across from her, the old wood creaking under his weight, and sat down at the reading table, as though he had been doing it every evening for years. Eleanor watched him with an expression that was not quite surprise, not quite irritation, but something adjacent to both. "You are sitting," she observed. "I am. In your own library. It would appear so. During your own ball, a fact of which I am painfully aware." She studied him for a moment. Her pale eyes moved across his face with the same careful attention she had given the book, reading him, assessing damage, cataloguing flaws. "You do not wish to be out there either," she said. It was not a question. "No. Then we are both hiding. I prefer to think of it as strategic withdrawal." The ghost of a smile crossed her face. It was barely there, a softening of the line of her mouth, a brief warmth in those cool grey eyes. It vanished almost instantly, but Edmund saw it, and something in his chest, some long dormant mechanism, clicked and began to turn. They sat in silence for a full minute. It was not awkward. It was not loaded with expectation or the frantic need to fill empty air with noise. It was the particular silence of two people who understood that words were not always necessary, that sometimes the most honest form of communication was simply existing in the same quiet space. Eleanor returned to her book. Edmund watched her turn pages. "What are you reading?" he asked eventually. "Your great-grandfather's botanical journals." He documented every species planted on the estate between 1742 and 1789. He was remarkably thorough, though his Latin nomenclature is occasionally creative. She glanced up. He also drew quite accomplished illustrations of fungi. I was not expecting that. Great-grandfather Aldous was considered eccentric. Eccentric is what wealthy families call their geniuses when they are embarrassed by the lack of gentlemanly idleness. Edmund looked at her. The mechanism in his chest turned another notch. From beyond the oak door, the muffled sound of the orchestra shifted into a waltz. The melody was slow, sweeping, achingly romantic, the kind of music designed to make young women dream and old women remember. Edmund heard it the way one hears rain against a window, distantly, belonging to another world. He stood up. Eleanor looked at him, a question forming in her brow. "Miss Voss," he said. His voice was quiet, stripped of its usual formality. "Would you do me the honor of a dance?" She stared at him. For the first time, her composure cracked, just slightly, just enough to reveal the human beneath the professional calm. Her lips parted, her silver eyes widened a fraction. "Here?" she said. "Here? In the library. I cannot think of a better room. There is no floor for dancing. There is a floor. It is made of oak, and it has supported this library for 200 years. I believe it can manage a waltz." Eleanor looked down at her ink-stained hands. She looked at her plain charcoal dress, her sensible boots, her complete and total absence of finery. She looked back up at the Duke of Ashworth, who was standing before her in immaculate black evening clothes, extending his hand to a woman who catalogued books for a living, in a room where no one could see, where there was no audience, no society, no mothers or gossips or scheming rivals, where the gesture could serve no political or social purpose whatsoever. He was not performing, he was asking. "I am not dressed for a waltz," she said, "and I am not built for ballrooms. We are well matched." She looked at his hand for a long time. Then she set down her pen, pushed back her chair, and placed her bare, ink-stained fingers against his open palm. His hand closed around hers. Her skin was warm, her grip was steady. They stood facing each other between the towering walls of books, the oil lamp casting their shadows long and golden across the floor. The waltz drifted through the closed door, muted and distant, like music heard through water. Edmund placed his free hand carefully at her waist. She rested her hand on his shoulder. The wool of her dress was rough beneath his fingers, nothing like the silk and satin he had spent the evening avoiding. They began to move. It was not elegant. Eleanor danced the way she catalogued, with methodical precision and an occasional misstep that she corrected immediately and without embarrassment. Edmund danced the way he did everything, with restrained competence and a seriousness that bordered on severity. They did not glide. They did not float. They moved carefully around the reading table, between the stacks of books, past the iron staircase, two serious people doing something entirely absurd and treating it with absolute gravity. Halfway through the waltz, Eleanor stepped on his foot. She did not apologize. She simply adjusted her stride and continued. Edmund felt something crack open inside him, something he had spent years boarding shut, and a sound escaped his throat that he barely recognized. He laughed. It was quiet, barely more than a breath, but it was real. Eleanor looked up at him sharply, startled not by the sound itself, but by the way it transformed his face. The severity dissolved, the hard lines softened. For a fleeting moment, he looked like a man instead of a title. "You are laughing at me," she said. "I am laughing near you." "There is a distinction. It is a very fine one. I specialize in fine distinctions." They turned again. The waltz was ending, the final strains fading through the heavy door. Their steps slowed. They stopped moving, but neither let go. They stood in the center of the library, his hand still at her waist, her hand still on his shoulder, the lamp flickering gently beside them. "Why me?" Eleanor asked. Her voice was very quiet. "There are 5 women in that ballroom who have been preparing for this evening for months. Any one of them would be a suitable match. Why walk past them all to ask a woman in a wool dress who smells of book dust?" Edmund looked at her. He looked at her pale eyes and her ink-stained fingers and her complete absence of pretense. He looked at the careful notes on the table, and the leather-bound journal, and the magnifying glass, and the cloth she used to clean the spines of books that were not hers, but that she treated as though they were precious. "Because you were not waiting," he said. The words settled between them like dust in lamplight. Eleanor held his gaze. She did not blush. She did not look away. She absorbed the words the way she absorbed information, carefully, completely, filing them in a place where she could examine them later in better light. "That is not a reason to dance with someone," she said. "It is the only reason." The door opened. The Dowager Duchess stood in the doorway, the blazing light of the ballroom flooding in behind her, turning her into a silhouette edged in gold. She looked at her son. She looked at the woman in the plain dress. She looked at their hands, still joined, still resting against each other, as though neither had remembered to let go. The Dowager's expression underwent a rapid series of transformations: surprise, confusion, calculation, and finally, a grudging, barely perceptible flicker of interest. "Edmund," she said. Her voice was carefully neutral. "The Sinclair party is departing. It is customary for the host to acknowledge his guests. I will be along shortly." The Dowager looked at Eleanor again. Her gaze was penetrating, the look of a woman who could assess a person's bloodline, fortune, and threat level in under 3 seconds. "And who is this?" "Miss Eleanor Voss. She is saving our Chaucer." The Dowager blinked. It was, Edmund reflected, the first time he had seen his mother blink in a way that suggested genuine uncertainty. "I see," the Dowager said, in a tone that indicated she did not see at all. "Miss Voss." She gave a nod that was neither warm nor cold, merely a formal acknowledgement that Eleanor existed, and retreated, pulling the door shut behind her. The library fell silent again. Eleanor released Edmund's hand. She stepped back, smoothing the front of her charcoal dress, a gesture that was less about the fabric and more about rebuilding the composure that had slipped during the waltz. "Your mother will not approve," she said. "My mother does not approve of anything. It is her primary occupation. I am serious, Your Grace. I am a working woman. I possess no title, no fortune, and no connections. I catalogue books. I am the precise opposite of everything a duchess should be." Edmund looked at her steadily. "You know the location of every volume in a collection that has defeated 3 previous cataloguers. You identified a conservation emergency that my steward missed for a decade. You are, by your own description, the only person standing between my great-grandfather's botanical journals and irreversible decay. That is not a qualification for marriage." "I did not mention marriage, Miss Voss. I mentioned a dance." The correction landed softly. Eleanor pressed her lips together, and Edmund saw something flicker in her expression. Not embarrassment, but awareness. The sharp, uncomfortable recognition that she had leapt ahead of the conversation because some small, unguarded part of her had wanted to. "You are right," she said. "Forgive me. I overstepped." "You did not overstep. You simply arrived at the destination before I had finished walking." She looked at him. The lamplight caught the silver in her eyes. "Good night, Your Grace," she said quietly. "Good night, Miss Voss." She sat back down at the reading table. She opened the botanical journal. She picked up her pen. Edmund watched her for one more moment, memorizing the image, the dark hair, the steady hands, the quiet concentration, the absolute self-possession of a woman who needed nothing from him, and therefore had, without trying, become the only person in 300 who made him want to stay. He turned and walked back through the door, into the light and the noise and the swirling, desperate performance of London society. Behind him, in the library, Eleanor Voss sat perfectly still. She stared at the open page without reading a single word. Her hand, the one he had held, rested flat on the table. She could still feel the warmth of his palm against her fingers. She closed her eyes. She opened them. She picked up her pen and returned to work. The mechanism had begun to turn. The following morning, Edmund did something he had not done in the 6 years since inheriting the dukedom. He entered the library before breakfast. He told himself it was about the Chaucer, the first edition Chaucer, sitting in direct sunlight, slowly disintegrating. Any responsible owner would want to inspect the damage personally. It was a matter of stewardship. It had nothing to do with the cataloguer. Eleanor was already there. She was standing on a rolling ladder near the east windows, her arm extended above her head, carefully removing a volume from the topmost shelf. Her charcoal dress had been replaced by one of dark navy, equally plain, equally devoid of ornament. Her hair was pinned in the same simple twist. She wore a leather apron over her dress, the kind a bookbinder might use, with small pockets stitched along the front, containing tools Edmund could not identify. She did not notice him enter. He stood at the base of the ladder, watching her work, and realized that he had no idea what to say. He, who had addressed Parliament, who had negotiated trade agreements, who had managed a dukedom of 12,000 acres with cold, mechanical efficiency, could not think of a single appropriate opening remark for a woman on a ladder. "The Chaucer," he said. Eleanor glanced down. She showed no surprise at finding the Duke of Ashworth standing beneath her at 7 o'clock in the morning. Second shelf, from the top, East Gallery, behind a misplaced copy of Fordyce's sermons. "I moved it yesterday. It is now in the climate-controlled cabinet in the lower reading room." "There is a climate-controlled cabinet?" "There is now. I had Mr. Harding commission one from the cabinet maker in the village. The invoice is on your steward's desk. You commissioned furniture for my estate without consulting me." "I consulted your Chaucer. It was more urgent." Edmund looked up at her. She looked down at him. The morning light, pale and clean, fell through the tall windows and illuminated the dust motes drifting between them like snow. "Will you come down?" he asked. "I am in the middle of a shelf. The shelf will wait." "Books do not wait, Your Grace. They decay. Then I will come up." He placed his foot on the first rung of the ladder before she could object. The wooden frame groaned under his weight. Eleanor pressed herself against the shelves, making room, her expression shifting from composed to alarmed. "This ladder is designed for one person. Then we will both need to hold on." He climbed until he was level with her. They stood on the same narrow rung, inches apart, the smell of old leather and linen starch filling the space between them. Eleanor's face was very close. He could see the faint spray of freckles across the bridge of her nose, invisible from any other distance. "This is extraordinarily inappropriate," she said. "I am aware. You are the Duke of Ashworth, a fact that haunts me daily. And I am your employee, a fact I am considering rectifying." She stared at him. "By dismissing me?" "By asking you to stay, not as a cataloguer, as a guest, for the summer." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the house seemed to hold its breath. Eleanor searched his face with those pale, devastating eyes, looking for the trap, the angle, the calculation. She was a woman who understood systems, who believed that every action had a logical structure behind it. She was looking for the logic. She did not find it. "Why?" she whispered. because last night was the first time in 6 years I remained in a room because I wanted to, not because I was obligated to. Eleanor swallowed. He watched the movement of her throat. She gripped the ladder rail so tightly her knuckles went white. "I cannot be your entertainment, Your Grace. I am not a novelty to be examined for a season and discarded. I know. If I stay, and your interest fades, I lose my professional reputation. A cataloguer who summers with a duke is no longer taken seriously. I know that too. Then you understand that what you are asking carries risk for only one of us." The words hit him squarely. He did not flinch, but he felt them, the sharp, clean logic of a woman who had survived on competence alone and could not afford the luxury of romantic foolishness. "You are right," he said. "The risk is unequal, and I have no way to correct that, except to tell you that my interest is not casual, that I do not understand it, that I have spent the last 12 hours trying to catalogue it and failing, and that I am standing on a ladder at 7 in the morning because I could not wait until a reasonable hour to see you again." Eleanor's breath caught. It was a small sound, barely audible, but in the silence of the library, it was deafening. She did not answer immediately. She looked at the book in her hand, the volume she had been removing from the shelf, a collection of 17th century botanical plates, hand-colored, exquisitely fragile. "If I stay," she said slowly, "I continue my work. The catalogue is not a pretext. It is the reason I am here, and it will remain the reason." "Agreed. I will not attend balls. I will not dress for dinner. I will not perform the role of potential duchess for your mother's benefit. I would not ask you to. And you will not climb my ladder again without warning." The corner of her mouth twitched. Edmund saw it. The mechanism turned. "Agreed," he said. Eleanor held his gaze for one more moment. Then she handed him the botanical plates. "Hold these, carefully. They are worth more than your horse." He took them. He climbed down. She climbed down after him, and they stood in the morning light of the library, surrounded by 4 centuries of accumulated knowledge, and began. The summer arrived in slow, golden increments. June burned away its clouds and settled into long, luminous days that stretched from early dawn to lingering twilight. Ashworth Park, freed from the grey grip of a cold spring, revealed itself as a sprawling, beautiful, slightly wild estate of rolling hills, ancient oak groves, walled gardens gone half to seed, and a lake so still it looked like poured mercury in the morning light. Eleanor worked. She worked with the focused, relentless energy of a woman who understood that her presence at Ashworth was justified only by her labor, and she intended to justify it beyond any possible challenge. She arrived in the library at 6 each morning and did not leave until the light failed. She moved through the collection shelf by shelf, volume by volume, creating a master catalogue in her precise, tiny hand that would eventually run to over 400 pages. Edmund watched. He did not hover. He did not invent excuses to visit. He simply rearranged his schedule so that his morning correspondence was handled at the desk in the library's lower reading room, a desk that had not been used in 20 years and required 2 footmen and a great deal of beeswax to make functional. He told himself it was a more pleasant working environment than his study. He told himself the light was better. He told himself many things, and believed none of them. They spoke in fragments, short, practical exchanges that were, on the surface, entirely professional. The Hartwell Atlas is missing plates 7 through 12. I will write to the dealer. Your grandfather's collection of Roman coins is stored in a box labeled assorted buttons. I thought you should know. I am not remotely surprised. There is a family of mice living behind the gibbon. They have been there long enough to have established territorial boundaries. Shall I call the groundskeeper? I have relocated them to the stables. They seemed amenable. Edmund learned to read her silences. He learned that when she paused mid-sentence and looked at the ceiling, she was not distracted, but was mentally cross-referencing a detail. He learned that she drank her tea black, that she despised sugar in any form, that she ate sparingly and forgot meals entirely when deep in a difficult section. He learned that she hummed when she thought she was alone, a low, tuneless sound that meant she had found something interesting. Eleanor learned to read his. She learned that his severity was not coldness, but exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness of a man who had carried too much for too long, with no one to share the weight. She learned that he was funny, dryly, quietly, devastatingly funny, but only when he forgot to be the Duke. She learned that he loved the estate, not as a possession, but as a responsibility, the way a parent loves a difficult child, with fierce, protective, occasionally resentful devotion. She learned that when he looked at her, which was often, his expression changed. The hard lines softened, the severity gentled. He looked at her the way he looked at the rarest volumes in his collection, with careful attention and a kind of reverent disbelief that something so valuable had ended up in his keeping. He never touched her, not once. The dowager observed. She observed from the morning room, from the terrace, from the drawing room, where she took her afternoon tea with the rigid discipline of a military campaign. She observed the way her son entered the library at 7 and did not emerge until the dressing bell. She observed the quiet woman in the plain dress who moved through the house like a shadow, carrying books, making notes, speaking to the servants with an easy, egalitarian warmth that was either refreshingly modern or catastrophically common, depending on one's perspective. The dowager had not dismissed Eleanor. This was significant. In the dowager's world, a working woman found alone with the Duke in a library at midnight would have been removed from the premises by dawn. Instead, the dowager had done something far more dangerous. She had waited. Halfway through July, she struck. Miss Voss. Eleanor looked up from a crate of newly arrived conservation supplies. The dowager stood in the library doorway, dressed in dove-grey silk, her posture so perfect it looked architectural. Your Grace? Eleanor set down the jar of wheat paste she had been inspecting and stood. Walk with me. It was not a request. They walked through the formal gardens, the gravel crunching beneath their feet in a rhythm that felt oddly martial. The dowager did not speak for the first 3 minutes. Eleanor, who understood the strategic use of silence, did not fill it. My son has not left the library in 6 weeks, the dowager said at last. The collection requires significant attention. The collection has been neglected for 30 years. It can survive another month. My son's reputation cannot. Eleanor said nothing. London is talking, Miss Voss. 5 women were presented, 5 women were refused. And the Duke has spent his summer with his cataloguer. The narrative writes itself. I am not responsible for London's narrative. The dowager stopped walking. She turned to face Eleanor with the full, undiluted force of her attention. It was like standing in front of a cannon. No, the dowager said, you are not. But you are responsible for your own choices, and I am asking you, directly, what your intentions are regarding my son. Eleanor met her gaze without flinching. I have no intentions. I have a contract. When the catalogue is complete, I will leave. And Edmund? The Duke is my employer, nothing more. The Dowager studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then she did something entirely unexpected. She sighed. It was a small, weary, human sound, utterly unlike the Dowager's usual crystalline control. "You are lying," she said softly, "and you are lying badly. Which tells me two things. First, that your feelings for my son are real, because a calculating woman would lie much better. And second, that you are terrified, because you know exactly how this ends for a woman without a title." Eleanor's composure cracked. It was barely visible, a tightening of her jaw, a brief, fierce brightness in her silver eyes, but the Dowager saw it. The Dowager saw everything. "I will not interfere," the Dowager said, "but I will give you one piece of advice. My son has spent 6 years turning himself into a machine. You are the first person who has made him resemble a human being. Do not make the mistake of believing that your lack of fortune makes you unworthy of him. Make him earn you, and if he cannot, then leave, and I will write you a letter of recommendation that will open every library in England." She turned and walked back toward the house, leaving Eleanor standing alone among the roses, her hands trembling at her sides. That evening, Edmund found Eleanor in the upper gallery. She was sitting on the floor between two towering shelves, her legs folded beneath her, surrounded by a semicircle of open volumes. The lamplight barely reached this high. She was working by candlelight, the flame guttering in the draught from the high windows. "You will ruin your eyes," Edmund said from the top of the iron staircase. "My eyes are my concern." He walked toward her. He sat down on the floor across from her, his back against the opposite shelf, his long legs stretched out in the narrow aisle between them. It was uncomfortable. He did not care. "My mother spoke to you today." "She did. What did she say?" Eleanor looked at him. The candlelight turned her silver eyes to gold. "She told me to make you earn me." Edmund was quiet for a long time. The candle flickered. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck 9. "She is right," he said. "She usually is." "Then tell me how." Eleanor set down her pen. She looked at him, at this man who had walked past 5 women to find her in a dark library, who had climbed her ladder, who had rearranged his life around a reading table, who sat on a cold floor in the upper gallery because she was there and he could not seem to be anywhere else. "Stay," she said quietly, "not because I am interesting or unusual or because I do not chase you. Stay because you understand what I am, and it is enough. Stay when the catalogue is finished and there is no reason for me to be here except that you want me to be." Edmund looked at her across the narrow aisle, across the books and the candlelight, and the vast, unbridgeable distance between a duke and a librarian. "I will," he said. It was not a declaration. It was not a promise wrapped in poetry or delivered on bended knee. It was 2 words, spoken quietly in a dark gallery, heard by no one but the books. It was enough. August gave way to September. The catalogue grew. Eleanor finished the East Gallery and moved to the West, where the collection skewed toward natural philosophy and mathematics. Edmund's morning correspondence expanded to fill the entire morning, then the afternoon. He stopped pretending the desk was about the light. She stopped pretending she didn't look for him when he was late. They did not touch. They did not speak of what was growing between them. They existed in a suspended state, circling each other with the careful, magnetic precision of 2 celestial bodies caught in the same orbit, too bound to separate, too cautious to collide. On the first day of October, it rained. It was not an English drizzle. It was a biblical downpour, the kind of rain that turned the lake into a churning grey sea and made the old house groan and creak like a ship. Eleanor was caught in it. She had been walking back from the village, where she had gone to collect a parcel of conservation tools from the post, and the storm hit without warning, turning the mile-long drive into a river of mud. Edmund saw her from the library window, a dark figure in a navy dress, soaked through, walking steadily through the rain, with a parcel clutched against her chest, protecting it from the water with her own body. She was not running. She was not panicking. She was walking with the same calm, methodical determination she brought to everything, as though the storm was an inconvenience she had chosen to ignore. He was outside before he made a conscious decision to move. He was crossing the gravel drive, the rain hammering against his shoulders, soaking through his coat in seconds. She saw him coming and stopped. Water streamed down her face. Her hair had come loose from its pins and hung in dark, heavy ropes against her neck. "You are going to ruin your parcel," he said, shouting over the rain. "It contains Japanese tissue paper. If it gets wet, 6 months of conservation work is compromised. Give it to me. You are equally wet." He pulled off his coat. He wrapped it around the parcel, bundling it in wool and linen, pressing it against his chest. The rain hit his shirt, plastering it against his skin. Eleanor stared at him. "You are going to catch your death," she said. "Then you will catalogue my remains." She laughed. It was the first time he had heard her truly laugh, not the ghost of a smile, not the twitch of her mouth, but a real, full, startled sound that broke through the rain and the wind and hit him like sunlight. They ran. They ran together through the downpour, across the gravel drive, up the stone steps, through the great oak doors, and into the entrance hall, where they stood dripping on the marble floor, breathless and soaked, and grinning at each other like children. Mrs. Cranston, the housekeeper, appeared with towels and a look of profound disapproval. Edmund ignored her. He unwrapped the parcel carefully, checking the tissue paper. It was dry, intact, he said, handing it to Eleanor. She took it. Their fingers touched. Both of them went still. It was the first time they had touched since the dance in the library. The contact was electric, a jolt that ran from fingertip to shoulder and settled somewhere deep in the chest. Eleanor's eyes met his. Water dripped from her hair onto the marble floor, each drop landing with a tiny, crystalline sound that seemed absurdly loud in the silent hall. "Thank you," she said softly. Edmund looked at her, standing in his entrance hall, soaked to the bone, holding a parcel of tissue paper like it was the most valuable thing in the world, and he understood, with the quiet, absolute certainty of a man who had spent his entire life avoiding this exact moment, that he was in love with her. He did not say it. He was not ready. She was not ready. The words were too large for the hallway, too heavy for the moment. "You should change before dinner," he said. "I do not dine with the family. You do tonight." Eleanor opened her mouth to object. She looked at his face, at the steady, quiet determination in his dark eyes, and closed it again. "I have nothing to wear," she said. "Wear what you like. I will inform my mother." He turned and walked toward the stairs, leaving a trail of water on the marble. At the base of the staircase he paused, one hand on the banister, and looked back. "Miss Voss, Your Grace, the catalogue, how much longer?" She held the parcel against her chest. 3 months, perhaps 4. He nodded slowly. Take 6. He climbed the stairs and disappeared. Eleanor stood alone in the entrance hall, dripping quietly, holding her tissue paper, and for the first time in her adult life, she did not know what to do next. She wore the navy dress. She wore it to dinner, pressed dry by one of the housemaids, with her hair repinned and her ink-stained fingers scrubbed until they were merely faintly grey at the tips. She sat at the long mahogany table, across from Edmund, with the dowager presiding at the head, like a silk-clad emperor surveying newly conquered territory. The dinner was quiet. The food was excellent. The conversation was careful, intelligent, and entirely devoid of the charged electricity that hummed beneath every glance Edmund and Eleanor exchanged across the candle-lit table. The dowager watched. She ate her pheasant. She said nothing. After dinner, Eleanor returned to the library. Edmund returned to his study. They did not speak again that night. But something had shifted. A wall had thinned. A door had opened a crack, and through it came the unmistakable warmth of something that could no longer be catalogued, contained, or shelved. October deepened. The estate wrapped itself in amber and gold. The oaks along the drive turned russet. Smoke rose from the village chimneys. The library grew cold, and Edmund had a new fireplace installed in the upper gallery, without being asked. Eleanor said nothing about it. She simply worked closer to the fire. The catalogue neared completion. 3 months became 2. 2 became 6 weeks. Eleanor worked faster, driven by a deadline she had not set, knowing that when the final volume was shelved, she would have no reason to stay. Edmund knew it too. He watched the pages of the catalogue multiply with the quiet dread of a man watching a clock count down to an ending he was not prepared for. On the first day of November, Eleanor finished. She placed the last volume, a modest octavo edition of Virgil's Georgics, on its correct shelf in the lower west gallery. She made the final entry in her catalogue. She cleaned her pen, capped her inkwell, and sat at the reading table where she had sat on the night of the ball, in the same chair, under the same lamp. The catalogue was complete. 412 pages, 12,741 volumes. Every book in the Ashworth collection accounted for, described, and shelved according to a system so elegant and logical that any future librarian would be able to navigate it without instruction. It was the finest work she had ever done, and it meant she had to leave. She sat in the silence of the finished library and felt the weight of it pressing against her chest. She had known this was coming. She had prepared for it. She had reminded herself, daily, that she was a professional, that this was a contract, that the warmth she felt when Edmund walked into the room was an inconvenience she would manage the way she managed everything, with discipline and order and the ruthless suppression of anything that threatened her carefully constructed independence. It had not worked. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. She knew his walk by now, the steady, measured stride, slightly favoring the left, where an old riding injury stiffened his knee in cold weather. He appeared at the end of the aisle, still in his riding clothes, his dark hair windswept, his cheeks flushed from the November cold. He saw the closed inkwell. He saw the capped pen. He saw the final page of the catalogue lying on the table, the ink still drying. He stopped. "It is done," Eleanor said. Edmund walked slowly toward the table. He looked down at the catalogue, at the hundreds of pages of her careful, beautiful handwriting, at the work of 5 months compressed into a stack of paper that represented every moment they had spent in this room together. "When will you leave?" he asked. His voice was very controlled. "Tomorrow, Mr. Harding has arranged a carriage." Edmund closed his eyes. When he opened them, the controlled mask was gone. In its place was something raw, unguarded, and entirely terrified. "I do not want you to go. I know. I am not saying this as your employer. I know that too. Then stay." Eleanor stood up. She faced him across the table, this man she had spent 5 months pretending not to love, and she let him see it. She let the composure drop, let the professional distance fall away, and she stood before him with every feeling she had spent months cataloguing and suppressing written plainly on her face. "As what?" she asked. "As your cataloguer, your companion, your curiosity. Tell me what I am to you, Edmund, because I need the correct classification before I can decide whether to stay or go." It was the first time she had used his name. The sound of it, spoken in her calm, low voice, cracked something open in the room. Edmund walked around the table. He stood before her. He raised his hand, and very slowly, very carefully, brushed a strand of dark hair from her temple. His fingers trembled. The Duke of Ashworth, who had addressed Parliament without a tremor, whose hand was steady enough to sign documents that governed 12,000 acres, was trembling. "You are not a classification," he said. "You are the reason this house feels like a home. You are the reason I walk into this room every morning and feel something other than duty. You are the only person who has ever looked at me and seen something worth saving, the way you see a damaged book, not as something ruined, but as something that simply needs the right care." Eleanor's eyes filled. She did not blink. She did not look away. She let the tears come, 2 quiet lines tracing down her angular face, and she did not wipe them away. "I am not a duchess," she said. "No, you are a librarian, and I am asking the librarian to stay." She placed her hand against his chest. She felt his heart beating beneath her palm, fast and unsteady, the heart of a man who had spent 6 years in silence and was finally, terrifyingly, speaking. "Then I will stay," she said. Edmund leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers. They stood like that, foreheads touching, breathing the same air, in the library where they had danced on their first night, surrounded by 12,000 volumes that she had saved, and the one heart she had not known she was saving. He kissed her. It was not a grand, sweeping, cinematic kiss. It was quiet, careful, and slightly clumsy, the kiss of 2 people who had waited so long that the reality of it was almost too much to hold. His hands cradled her face. Her fingers gripped the front of his riding coat. The oil lamp flickered beside them, casting their intertwined shadow across the spines of 1,000 books. When they pulled apart, Eleanor looked up at him with those pale silver eyes, still wet, still shining, and said, "Your Virgil is on the wrong shelf." Edmund laughed. It was the second time she had heard him truly laugh, and it filled the library the way light fills a room when the curtains are thrown open after a long, dark winter. "Then we had better fix it," he said. The Dowager was informed at breakfast the following morning. She received the news with a single raised eyebrow, a long sip of tea, and the words, "It took you long enough. I will write to the bishop." The wedding was held in the estate chapel on a grey December morning. Eleanor wore a dress of deep green velvet, simple and unadorned, with no train and no veil. Her only jewelry was a small brass magnifying glass on a chain, a gift from Edmund, engraved with the words, "For seeing clearly." The congregation was small. The steward, Mr. Harding, Mrs. Cranston, the housekeeper, the dowager in silver silk, the village vicar, who had known the Hale family for 40 years and wept quietly through the vows, a handful of tenants, no London society, no noblewomen, no gossip columnists. Eleanor walked down the aisle, carrying not flowers, but a single leather-bound volume, the restored first edition Chaucer, its spine repaired, its pages cleaned, its binding preserved for another 200 years. She placed it on the altar, beside the Bible, and married the Duke of Ashworth, with ink still faintly visible beneath her fingernails. Winter settled over Ashworth Park like a benediction. Snow covered the grounds. The lake froze solid. Smoke curled from every chimney. Inside, the library glowed with firelight and lamplight, and Eleanor Hale, the Duchess of Ashworth, continued her work. She had started a new project, a complete conservation plan for the estate's entire archive, including the family papers, the estate records, and the personal correspondence of 6 generations of Hale dukes. It would take years. She intended to enjoy every one of them. Edmund worked beside her. He had permanently relocated his study to the library, and their 2 desks sat facing each other across the reading table, papers and books and teacups accumulating between them like evidence of a shared life being built word by word. In the evenings, they danced. Not in the ballroom, never in the ballroom. In the library, between the shelves, with no music except the ticking of the mantel clock and the occasional creak of the old oak floor. They danced slowly, quietly. 2 people who had found each other in a room full of silence and discovered that silence, shared, was the most intimate language of all. The Dowager never mentioned the 5 noblewomen again. She mentioned Eleanor frequently in her correspondence with London society, describing her daughter-in-law as a woman of formidable intellect and impeccable taste in tea, though her wardrobe remains a work in progress. Eleanor read the letter. She laughed. She filed it in the family archive under Correspondence, Dowager, Amusing. On the coldest night of the year, with snow falling thick against the library windows and the fire burning low in the grate, Eleanor sat in her chair and Edmund sat in his, and neither of them spoke. They did not need to. The library breathed around them, warm and alive and perfectly ordered, every book in its place, every silence full of meaning. Edmund looked across the table at his wife. She was reading, her brow furrowed in concentration, a pencil tucked behind her ear, her fingers stained with the particular shade of blue-black ink that he had come to associate with home. She glanced up. She caught him looking. She did not smile. She held his gaze, steady and sure, and in her pale silver eyes he saw everything he had spent 6 years believing he would never find: warmth, understanding, partnership, and the quiet, unshakable certainty of a woman who had chosen him not because he was a duke, but because he had walked past every glittering thing in the room and found her in the only place that mattered. She reached across the table. She took his hand, her fingers laced through his. "The catalogue," she said softly. "What about it?" "I may need to start a 2nd volume." Edmund smiled. It was a real smile, warm and unguarded, and entirely his, not the Duke's, not the heir's, not the mask he wore for London. "Take as long as you need," he said. The snow fell, the fire crackled, the library held them both, 2 quiet people in a house full of books, entirely content with the silence they had built together. Thank you for listening to this story. If the quiet strength of Eleanor and the transformation of the Duke of Ashworth moved you, please give this video a like and share it with anyone who loves a slow-burn historical romance. subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Leave a comment below and tell me, what was your favorite moment between Edmund and Eleanor? I would love to hear from you. Until next time.